Hey, pals.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome to the Charleston International Airport,
That's
where
right.
we are coming to you from today.
It's not 3 o'clock. Apologies.
We had some traffic issues.
We got a little bit lost on St. John's Island.
Also, the traffic did not want us to eat lunch.
No.
We kept getting thwarted in our search for lunch. But we've had a great couple days here in Charleston working with our partners down in Charleston, the Charleston Metro Chamber of Commerce and Charleston Southern University, as we help prepare the workforce for Gen Z.
Yikes.
God bless them.
It's
And
all work.
Gen Z for the workforce. Because we don't believe in doing easy things.
No.
Why would we?
Hence today's title.
Exactly.
For our live.
Exactly.
You know what you're getting from us. You know already.
So let's kick this off. We'll do our credits, and then we've got only 8 empathy exercises for you guys today. Minor. And then we're going to talk about missing white woman syndrome. So stay tuned.
All right. Let's get into the empathy exercises. Number 1. Our friend Jay. Thank you for your apologies for being thwarted.
We did eventually eat lunch, don't worry.
We did eat lunch. We're in the lounge. It all works out. We apologize to anyone who came online at 3, who didn't see us. Maybe you're in a meeting. Replay crew, we love you. Podcast crew, we love you. Same content, just a different time. So, empathy exercise number 1 was actually from last week, and we forgot to do it because it didn't make it on the list. So this is a couple weeks old now. But Kevin Richardson, one of the exonerated 5, the group formerly called the Central Park 5, was 5 young men who were wrongfully convicted and incarcerated for, I think, between 5 and 12 years. But Kevin Richardson was the first person to earn an honorary bachelor's degree from Syracuse University in their graduation. Yay, Kevin! That was a long-held dream of his before he was incarcerated, and so absolutely delighted to see that as a returning citizen, he was able to get that achievement. And the pictures of him, if you haven't seen it, Google the pictures of him in his cap and gown, crying. It's fantastic. It's just joy-bringing. Okay, number 2.
We heard last week, this week, time is immaterial, that there was a school in Colorado, a Christian school in Colorado, that essentially pressured their volleyball coach into resigning due to his sexuality. And the students did not take that lightly.
The students said no.
They said absolutely not. There were protests all over the show. As a faith-based person, I want to actually even more say good job, students, because when I was growing up, we were still kicking girls out of Christian schools for getting pregnant. So this is really exciting stuff. I'm really, really stoked. We will, in fact, be linking as we do always. So we got this via the Instagram account Impact, which we follow very closely here at Abbey Research because they bring us stories like this from all over the show. So congratulations to those students. And note, was not able to find if Coach Tonga was able to retain employment. If I'm honest, I wouldn't want to retain employment at that place. So hopefully they have achieved other employment. But I hope no matter what, they were encouraged by the student outpouring of righteous anger over the firing of somebody because of their sexual orientation.
That's right. Okay, empathy exercise number 3 has to do with Dancing with Stars, which neither of us watch.
No.
So sorry, not sorry. But we are delighted that their 30th season premiered with the first same-sex dancing team.
Good job, JoJo Siwa.
Ever. JoJo Siwa, who Kristen tells me is a famous person.
She was on Dance Moms. Anybody who has a child a girl child under the age of 10 probably knows JoJo as the bow girl. Her bows are in Claire. She's very well known. She came out last summer or potentially the summer before, I believe during the pandemic, very casually, and in a very holistic way, introduced the internet to her girlfriend. I believe she identifies as bisexual. I could be wrong, but she is currently dating a lady who she is very taken with. And I am delighted that she was in a same-sex dance couple, especially after surviving Abby Lee Miller and Dance Moms.
So we're very excited from this news from Dancing with the Stars. We love to see all kinds of humans represented, all kinds of places. And you know, human beings have been dancing for a long time before we had gender constructs. So, all right, this is Dr. Aaron's string of empathy exercises. We learned last week that ESPN is going to debut its first all-women baseball broadcast. So file it under, sorry, I just hit you. File it under Representation Matters. As we both grew up sports fans, and not seeing anyone that looked or sounded like us talking about the sports that we loved. So fair dues, ESPN. Thanks for showing the generation of Kristens and Aarons that are tiny that there's a place for them. We'll talk about what gender representation looks like and how women are expected to dress and appear on television another time. All right. Rolling through the empathy exercises. I don't even know what number we're up to now, but we're up to one of them. Not happy news. We have a survey from the University of Pittsburgh
Apologies.
Graduate School of Public Health had done a survey that found people who were victims or survivors of sexual assault have later instances of brain damage. So that we'll have the link in the show notes for the CNN article that breaks down exactly what they meant by that, but no shocker from two people that spend a lot of their time talking about trauma, that experiencing physical and emotional trauma has long-lasting physical and emotional impacts. Color me shocked, but it's great to have the scientific research to back up and show, and hopefully we can help support these humans better now that we know how their body responds to that trauma. All right, Dr. K.
As you guys are well aware, we have been in particularly attuned to differently abled folks in across various professions recently since watching Crip Camp, and also just kind of committing to paying closer attention. And we were delighted to find out that at New York Fashion Week, a TikToker who has and by TikToker we mean somebody who has risen to fame on TikTok, has risen to fame being a disability advocate. I've seen her say that she rolled her way through through New York Fashion Week, but she was represented at New York Fashion Week. She rolled the runway, and the story of her in Pop Sugar is amazing. We'll link to it in the show notes. And next, hold on 1 minute. I need to cough louder. I'm going to remove my microphone. Un momento, por favor. Guys, anyone out there that knows how to fix allergies, you just let me know. So very exciting news from Europe this week is that Switzerland has voted to legalize same-sex marriage. If you had asked me prior to this if it was illegal in Switzerland, I would have said no. So this is a surprise to both of us. What a delightful one. I would have thought that Switzerland, the island of neutrality, wouldn't have cared that much about this, but evidently took them a hot minute. Welcome to the party. Glad you're here. We're not going to be mad it took you this long.
Yeah.
So yay for Switzerland. Super excited for all the Swiss queers out there who can now get legally married.
Yeah, way to go, Swiss folks. All right, last up.
This transitions really well into our main topic, so we're going to unpack this one a little bit more. Those of you guys who as you're listening to this in real life, if you also subscribe to our podcast, yesterday, one of our Vault episodes about Sarah Everard dropped. Sarah Everard was murdered in London, a white woman who was walking home and was brutally attacked by an off-duty Metropolitan Police officer. It is a mess. It is a problem. All of that is atrocious and terrible. We will say that Sarah Everard was front page news when it happened. And that's the only way that we found out about it. and therefore covered it and did a whole episode on it. If you're listening to this on the podcast, just rewind back a couple Mondays, and we're happy to enjoy. It's also, the video is still up here on the YouTube channel of our discussion. It's a hot-ish take in our category of series. We bring this up because last week, Sabina Nessa, who was 28 years old and an English woman of color, was murdered while walking to meet a friend at a pub. The first place that her murder appeared in the newspaper was on page 28, which is significantly not page 1.
It's not the front page, is it?
Not the front page. We found out from an Instagram post called Instagram account we follow called Feminist Voice, and then have been following this closely. Now, in England, every 3 days, a man kills a woman. In England, every 3 days. When we broaden that out to the United Kingdoms of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, we're at almost 2.3 days. Every 2 days and a morning, a man kills a woman throughout the United Kingdom. Obviously, this is a major problem. It is a significantly larger problem around the world for women of color, Indigenous women, Asian women, Latin women, Black women, non-white women, fully abled women, neurodiverse women. Every time you go into an intersection, those stats get higher. So we want to say, first of all, Sabina Nessa is her name. We should all know it. Sabina Nessa was murdered. Now, there's a lot of names we don't know, and we're going to talk about that in a second, because there's a lot of names we do know. As we record this, Gabby Petito's family just laid her to rest in Long Island, and she's a name that most Americans certainly know right now. But in where her body was discovered, 700 Indigenous women have been missing and presumed murdered, or actually factually murdered, in the span of the last year. Decade. Thank you. Sorry, it was year around the country, not just the area is the decade. But I don't know any of their names. And our guess is that you don't either. And that's why we would like to change to our main topic today, which is something that the legendary journalist Gwen Ifill, who, if you don't know who Gwen Ifill is, she's within the United States probably one of the premier Black female journalists. Like, she's just this voice of gravitas, wisdom. She's been also doing this for a minute, and she coined the term missing white woman syndrome, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so I mean, this is something that we are have talked around intersections. We've certainly covered the blanket movement for Indigenous women and girls, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, Two-Spirit. So if you see that really long MMIWG2S hashtag, that's what it's referring to. But we've covered it a lot on our YouTube channel through pieces of art that we've consumed, through our newsletter. I did a news desk newsletter about missing, murdered, and Indigenous women and girls recently. But the broader scope of non-white women is something that has come to the forefront again as we grapple with the horrible story of what happened to Gabby Petito and how she's talked about in the media. So that's what Gwen Ifill was talking about when she coined this term, missing white women syndrome, to underscore the media's fascination with white women who go missing. And, we can unpack that further to talk about attractive young white women who go missing. So it's even within that intersection gets more and more specific. And as two humans who study gender and society and why media covers the things that it does, we thought this was a great opportunity to unpack some of the why of our fascination with white women and white young girls, and how that is very detrimental to folks of color and communities of color all over the place.
So to hit pause here really briefly, what happened to Gabby Petito is disgusting and terrible. She was a victim of domestic violence. That is absolutely, I don't know a single person that, based on surveillance photos and then the warrant that is out for her ex-fiance, boyfriend, human murderer's arrest, he is the only suspect for a whole lot of reasons. What happened to her is terrible. And as we said, men murder women in England every couple days. When we go to the international statistics, it keeps getting lower. That doesn't mean that we can hold that and advocate for safer treatment of women, for the end of domestic violence, for the death of toxic masculinity, and also critique the fact that everyone in America knows her name because of how the media treats those. So we want to advocate that we can hold those things in tension.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how much more we want to unpack this in terms of really just wanted to highlight that people are having this conversation. I don't know if there was anything more that you wanted to say. Very obviously, we're holding these things in tension, but we've seen a lot of people having this conversation. There's a link to a blog from the Readout with Joy Reid, who covered it very early on into the Gabby Petito case and was the person who introduced me to this idea of white woman syndrome and missing white woman syndrome, and the idea around, I knew that we focused on particularly young women. I mean, we grew up in the age of Jean Benet Ramsey and several other young white girls who went missing.
And the girl on the milk carton, that Kelly Martin movie in the after school special, the girl on the milk carton.
Yeah, so it's something culturally that like we've been swimming in that soup for a while. But this is the first time I can remember people in very public forums talking about the racial disparity and how this is covered and how it's talked about. And I haven't done a lot of work on non-Indigenous missing women and girls, but I can tell you, from what I've learned about that, it's so much that has to do with the internalized racism that we have about those people groups. And so the perception that we have, stereotype of Native people in that they are irresponsible, they drink too much, all of these kinds of stereotypes informs the way that the police and the media cover when one of their community members goes missing. And so I've heard women tell stories that, the police wouldn't act quickly on a missing case of this woman's daughter. And they went to the police and the police were like, well, did you check with her boyfriend? Like, are you sure she hasn't gotten a new boyfriend lately? She was like, yes, I checked with everyone. That I came to the police because I ran out of options. And so the prevalence of drug addiction and alcohol addiction in Indian country negatively impacts the investigation of these. There's also a lot of other issues jurisdictionally with Indian country we don't have time to get into. But, I remember hearing a person talking about it recently saying the way we hyper criminalize Black and brown bodies, it's assumed that if one of them goes missing, then it is through the fault of their own. Oh, it's because they were involved in something nefarious. It's because they were involved in criminal activity, or they probably, X, Y, and Z. And we fill in this narrative from this inherited, internalized racism that a lot of people don't even realize. And then you add the 24 news cycle of it all on top of it. So it's a both and we've got we've got another article that talks about what Gabby Petito's murder teaches us about cops and us. So this is, a cultural problem that has worked its way into the way that these crimes are investigated, but it's also worked its way into the way we all talk about it and perceive it, which is why we wanted to take some time today to just be other voices saying, hey, everybody, this happens. Let's be aware.
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't heard our coverage of purity culture or my rants, they are in very quickly. One of the reasons that we prime white women and young white women and young pretty white women is that we prime them for their wounds more than anything else. So really, truly, subconsciously, what we grieve is that Gabby Petito can't be a mother. And that's what we're concerned about. We don't actually want, culturally, subconsciously, women of color to be mothers. That's part of the problem, is that they keep having children. We only want, culturally, white women to have children, and we particularly would prize Gabby Petito's genes over like mine. So the importance of, she was tiny, she was blonde, she was a lot of things, that this is why we're very concerned about missing children and missing young white women, is because of this. And Gabby Petito was also not a sex worker. She was an Instagram influencer, doing all these kind of things from a place of extreme privilege, which also, because we can someday get into the van life thing her and her boyfriend were doing, that makes me angry.
Y'all.
But anywho, so what's it? Anywho.
Yeah.
The real issue is that we still, as a culture, tend to view women as walking reproductive options. And if we want the reproductive option that they can produce, then we prize their bodies. If we are indifferent to the reproductive option that they can reproduce, we are indifferent to them.
Yeah.
And that's basically what it comes down to, not to be cynical. I hope you can hear in our voices that we're being very matter of fact. There's a lot of research and science behind this. But the good news from our perspective is that we are heartened that people are angry about the coverage around her case, that no one is saying that what happened to her was okay, but the coverage about her is a problem. The way the internet latched onto this case, all of those kind of things, that there are other names that we should know, like Sabina Nessa, that we should always know other names.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out as well, right? We've framed this as a racial disparity, but this is also a sexuality and a gender performance disparity as well. So, you know, missing queer folks of any color, but particularly in this country, missing and murdered Black queer folks and Indigenous queer folks are at the bottom of that pool of people that do not get considered when something traumatic happens to them, when they are victims of violence and trauma. And so it's not only like the gender performance is part of Gabby Petito. It's her race and her gender, and the fact that she looks like women, quote unquote, are supposed to look in a way that fits with the cultural model. So anybody that's gender or sexual performance doesn't fit within that, culturally, it's not something that we have heretofore cared when something happens to that body. And, you know, we can go into the Handmaid's Tale of it all and the value of the woman's womb being the most prized part of her. And so, as you were talking, I was like, oh, it's queer folks too. So it's the intersection of those and how they overlap in terms of race and gender and sexuality that kind of shows where they fall on the list of priorities. But as Dr. Kristen said, we're super encouraged to see this many people talking about it, not just on social media, but on really public vocal platforms. And we want to add our voices to that and say, you know, these women matter, these humans matter, their names matter, their lives matter. And it's up to us to be the ones to advocate for changing the systems that keep all of us unaware and to keep their families and their loved ones and them silent.
That's going to be it from us today. We would like to also respect the others in the lounge here at Charleston, and we're going to say goodbye for today. We're not sure what we're talking about next week, don't worry, but I'm sure it'll be something entertaining and depressing because that's pretty much our brand.
That's what we do.
Next week I will be in the final preparations for TEDx Farmingdale, Long Island, and then the week after we will be in Chicago. So the next week we'll both be in our offices, but I will probably only come to you with a third of a brain. So we'll make that work.
Pick something nice and fluffy for Dr. Kristen to talk about.
Talk about my favorite books.
So maybe we can just talk about Bridgerton.
Let's talk about how excited we are about Kate Sharma. Well, pals, wherever you find this, we deeply hope that someone knows your name and that someone holds it tightly, and that we can all commit to growth as we learn the names of others. It's been a privilege as always, guys. Bye.
Bye.